just so you guys know kind of like what is the process for us being able to, or me being able to assess these classes in as accurately as I can, is that in Dynasty, we essentially hold what is called like labbing a class, like a lab as in like laboratory, right? So we would assign specific people, deep dive these classes into the CBT, a good conclusion. At the very least, you know that we did go about this systematically and that we did try our best to try to do this so we can give you information that is as accurate as possible with our own experiences. So the much awaited tier list video. I will also be holding another tier list stream / podcast with some of my fellow content creators. Anybody who I haven't invited yet, I welcome you all to join. We're going to be doing it closer to launch. Get in contact with me on Discord, tag me. This way we can pull in the minds of like several people who dove deep into the CBT, and we can sort of peer review everyone's assessment. I'm pretty sure everybody's going to have their own version of the tier list, what's important, what's not important. But a quick disclaimer before we start: there is likely going to be ongoing buff / nerf updates. Make sure that you're subscribed, make sure that you tune in, because I will be following the game very, very, very closely. How am I going to judge the classes in this tier list? So I know a lot of people might think that, you know, hey, by the way, I'm gonna put this class in A tier or B tier because like they do X amount of damage or something like that. What I am going to include, obviously, I'm going to include the PvE stuff as well, like the dungeons, EC, MVPing, and I'm also going to include the PvP, the small scale and the large scale. It's not just going to be about the frag potential of the class. I'm also going to be adding the overall impact of the class. Like, they might not be the main carries, they might not be the top fraggers, but there are classes that have huge and lasting impact on fights that if you don't have these classes, you're going to be in a lot of trouble versus people that do have them. Let's start off with Lord Knight. I think for Lord Knight right now, I feel is a very clear A tier class. Starting off with PvP, I know a lot of you that know me from Global know that I had 0 LKs in my guild, and that was kind of like by design. I thought the class was incredibly bad, but there's been some changes, right? LKs were and have always been the kings of early to mid game, but they fell off really hard in the late game. I think it's important to know why for context, and so you can make a better decision. It was a time when layering AoEs in choke points was key during War of Imperium because of how stacking AoEs work in Ru. It was very punishing to almost impossible for an LK to survive pushing through. The only way that you could do it to some degree is spending enough in the game to make yourself super tanky, but even then a lot of the times that didn't work. Like, for example, a new guy who spent 50k on his Lord Knight to make it work, to prove a point, and then he couldn't even make it past the choke point. Even when you could survive pushing through, they would have a champion, a Stalker, a Master Smith just waiting for you. The moment that you got past that AoE line, you're going to get destroyed anyway, and you're too far away from your priest for them to be able to resurrect you. This new version, however, of GVGs is a lot more dynamic. The new GVG system no longer encourages you to just camp one spot and layer AoEs for an hour. It kind of forces you to move constantly with the bounties and with the kind of like random spawn sometimes in Guild League in Veil of Clash. This has gotten rid of Lord Knight's main issue. They now have easier access to the enemy clump. They can perform their job as melee AoE with Lion's Roar. They're still relatively tanky, mostly because, like, you know, that build that they need to be able to do that AoE damage also scales off of their own tankiness. For small scale fights, it's easier to play zone control, so they're pretty highly rated as well for like DD and all that. LK is absolutely A tier in PvP because they are the main melee AoE frontliners and they will always be needed. The only other thing that I can say about them for PvP, especially in like those small scale fights, is that you just really need to know the skirmishes that you can and cannot take. Sacri Paladins, for example, you never really take those fights. You're not winning those unless maybe you build specifically against it with crit res and forego some damage, then maybe you can win against them. Highly doubt it still. And as for PvE is also easy. You could easily just go Clashing Spiral, make it easier for yourself, and, you know, just kind of like go ham at the mobs, right? Depending on the person, I could even put them up into S tier. right? Again, if a player is just good enough at finding these opportunities to engage and then AoE, the class is tanky enough and does enough AoE damage that it can actually enable you to make those plays. But again, that's for the player that's like, kind of like above average, right? Another thing that would bring them up to top tier is because they are realistically the main and the best melee AoE frontliner. But for now, for the average player, I'm going to put them in A tier. You can play this as a regular player and still be clearly above average just because of how the class functions currently. I do think that it still has its issues scaling into the late game, but as it is right now, it is our current and really only best like option of having an AoE frontline. So have to put them in A. Paladins. Now, this one, a lot of you guys saw me play this class in CBT. A lot of you guys saw me kind of like do a lot of work playing this class. But realistically, that was in probably the early to like mid stages of the game, right? So realistically, what I would do for Paladin is I would probably put Paladin actually a little bit lower than LK. I would probably put it in B tier because it is kind of like a high impact class, but it does fall off and gets relegated to a role that a lot of people, the average player, might not even like. So yeah, I'm just gonna put it like a step below an LK. Early game is a bit of a struggle bus. You don't really do much in the early game until you get to the early stats that you need to sort of function. The earlier find that you need to sort of like function, you need plus 12 on your weapon, for example. And it's also harder now to be able to build the max amount of like attack speed while having high enough crit that to the point that you don't completely get countered by people that are building a little bit of like crit res. Mid game to the early parts of late game though is absolutely like peak performance. You get to have some fun for about almost like maybe close to a month. Not to everybody, because people that are gonna full send on like crit res, they're going to ruin your day. And then you get to the late game, you have kind of like the lowest crit values out of the other crit classes. Your damage kind of plateaus, and then when inevitably, just again, when everybody decides to build crit res, because again, a lot of like the meta right now is those crit classes, you suffer more than those classes would, right? You would suffer more than a sniper would. You would suffer more than like a Synex would. And for context, less than 2 weeks into CBT, some people had enough resources to customize their enchants to have 100 plus crit res. I was actually hitting some snipers that I wasn't even able to crit anymore because they just had such high crit res. This means that since you wear crit damage cards like Squidget cards to scale your damage, you lose all of that effectiveness if you don't crit. And, that does kind of feels bad, but, that is the state of Sacred Paladin getting into the late game. The bright side is that because you have the utility, you're always going to be relevant. And if you are a fan of this playstyle more than just Sacred, Paladin goes up to A tier for you. More so if you have hands, like being able to like switch Devo targets quickly to save a teammate is always like a chef's kiss like move. Like I always appreciate seeing like really good Devo Pallies be able to pull that off in a quick second when their teammate is in danger. You can even go Naga Shield if you want to full send it on like being a tank utility / like reflect class and still see a lot of impact. But I know for a fact that people really love being able to do big damage with Sacred, but unfortunately it does come with its own problems in the late game, and that's why I kind of have to like lower the rating a little bit, because I know that's what people are looking forward to the most. But again, if you are that type of like utility support enjoyer of Paladin, this class easily places in A tier along with Lord Knight. But that said, while during its peak, a Sacred Paladin is an absolute menace. With Furious Pouring, Horong, Smoky cards, you essentially have double gap closers. Stealth classes can no longer really feel safe versus you, and obviously a surprise Sacred to the face coming out of Hyde is like top tier Ragnarok jump scare essentially. Battle Chant is free stats. Glory Dominee is really good peel and or kill setup for your carry. As for PvE, really good. Luckily for us, these mobs don't really build crit res, so you can essentially solo carry some instances like EC with Hunterfly cards, and with a Bard or a Dancer, you're practically unkillable unless the dungeon kind of like hard stat checks you, right? So Paladin is still going to be very enjoyable, and that's why it could easily fluctuate between B and A tier. Maybe in the future, the saving grace for Paladins is that if they finally allow you to, I believe this is the case in global, where you could actually use converters to allow yourself to be force neutral. Because again, somebody builds like double orc baby card along with like, you know, double even like horn card to, if they really hate physical damage dealers, you're kind of screwed, right? Along with like enough crit res to negate your crit. Yeah, you're in a pretty bad spot as a paladin. You know, that's why I had to kind of put it in B tier. High priest, I mean, this is probably very obvious, but like just S tier. Look, people are going to say something like, "Oh, by the way, you know, Emmy got nerfed quite a bit, but it still is a decent PvE slash grind option, right? Just that you can't really rely on it too hard for PvP, but it's not bad for choke point defense if you already have it anyway. But for the most part, what makes priest like S tier really is the fact that, like, you know, support wise, we've been seeing some healing buffs towards high priest. It still does not have as much sustain as a bard or dancer. What it does have, however, is the most effective support kits in the game. A bard dancer working in conjunction with a high priest is always going to be a staple for me in my own personal team composition. Priest bond alone is already so high value, and overall just the priest buffs alone are an absolute like game changer. So we kind of like use the CBT as a means to limit tests like team comps, and honestly facing a team with a bard or dancer and a priest was an insta loss every time we ran a single support comp. We tried running like single like bard comps, for example, and it was really hard to deal with because they just have double res, and priest res is way better to begin with. But again, dealing with the two of those, sustain plus double res plus you know, having the priest buffs as well, and them full sending the bond on their carry, man, it was hard to deal with. And I really can't see myself being in a party and trying to win without having, you know, high priest in it. And then the next one we have is champion. So champion, champion I feel like is in a pretty decent spot. It's definite, I don't see it as like being above average. I'd see it as like, let's say like average, right? In the hands of a good player, easily could be B, slightly average. Built well in the hands of a really good player, it does have a shot at going up to A tier. But for the average person, champion is kind of like in C tier right now. They have gotten a lot better since they got the finger offensive buffs, and they've been doing really good damage, not just in PvE, but also in PvP, even without Asura. That said, they are nowhere near the large-scale capability of like LKs, Dorams, and the like. But they still have great small-scale skirmish capabilities. What hurts them in modes like DD is the current 2-2-1 meta. That first two, meaning like support. Asura is still a very deadly tool that unfortunately gets negated by the fact that the enemy team can resurrect who you kill immediately, while you basically have a 10-second refractory period before you can get hard again. Before you can Asura again. And obviously, that's also assuming that you don't Asura their pets by accident, or your Asura then get negated by their Child of Earth. In PvE, while you do deal decent damage now, you're still not at the level of like Biochemists or Stalkers. It should be mentioned, however, that if you work with your party to eliminate both supports in PvP before they can res each other, it could work. It's more effort for the same result, but it could work, especially if you really love the class. You can have team compositions where you can Asura one support and your Stalker can coerce the other support, and your team gangs up on them. Just requires more teamwork, right? So you really have to be in voice chat with your team. Thankfully, the game has in-game voice chat that has pretty decent quality. You also have to take into account that while you're doing all of this, the enemy DPS aren't gonna stand idly by either. So you would have to do it quick, and you would have to survive right after as well. And then the next one we have is, let's cover Synex. Some people might disagree with this, but Synexes, I feel like right now, and I'm scared to do this because it would make people play it, which means that, you know, I would be in danger because there's a very good chance that I want to play Biochemist at launch. But I feel like Synexes are S tier right now. If you were talking about the beginning of CBT, I would put them in C tier. Continuous buffs, however, have given Synex some pretty heavy early mid-game power spikes, specifically the mid-game, to the point that I do worry that they might become way too OP in the late game, because I feel like they're getting like really crazy buffs in the mid-game right now. in the early to mid game. That yeah, well, I mean we'll just have to see, right? But for as of right now, it is kind of scary having to face these guys once all of their stats are fleshed out, because you practically have a perma stealth AoE skill that does ridiculous damage that happens to auto proc sonic blow. Think about that, like think about that for a second and think of the ways that you can get creative with it, right? And the only downside, and thank goodness it has a downside, is that the range is relatively short. Although they still have ways to go around that. They're mobile enough that they can usually get away with relative ease. A lot of people still get caught, but that's kind of like not a class issue. It's more of a skill issue, right? With the current kit that the class has, if you have situational awareness and you know the effective range of classes slash skills that can threaten you, you should always have agency over the other classes because you're in stealth. A prime example of certain situations would be, let's see, if you see a Lord Knight there, there's a good chance that they're going to start spamming Lion's Roar, so that should be a sign for you to not get too close. If you see a champion heading towards you, that's your sign to dip out, because if they have Ruach on, chances are you're going to get a sword. But in large-scale champions, they tend to go the finger offensive route, and that's generally how they frag out. In the meantime, those squishy carries like snipers are going to be your food, right, as a Synax. And the next one is Stalker. So Stalker, I'm absolutely going to be putting it comfortably in A tier. Again, really skilled players can make it into a top tier S tier class, but the average player will at the very least be A tier. Really good PvE damage. Similarly, good damage in PvP. Does not have the perma stealth that Synax has, which drops it down a tier, but what it does have is probably one of the most OP playmaking abilities in the game. Think about it this way, right? Let's say you are the top fragger for your guild. You inch forward because you kind of want to get in range to do your damage, and then the enemy Stalker decides you don't get to play the game today and coerces you into their stack, kills you, your supports try to go and res you, they die because of it, and then your guild is down a party and their best carry. Or your supports get coerced and now you don't have sustain, right? So it's like the average stalker can easily do this, and the most skilled stalkers can do this and then do more by being able to output more damage. Also being able to copy like certain skills like True Sight, for example, that gives crazy buffs, is also a huge plus as well, right? And that's what kind of gives the class that top tier damage that it currently has. So I would have to put them in A tier. Again, has pretty much the potential to be top tier as well in the right hands. So Wizards, I know some people are going to disagree with me on this one, but I actually am putting Wizards in the A tier. Now, before you overreact, with the recent buffs, High Wizard still feels pretty lacking in terms of damage, but the zone control that they provide is insane. Adding Tetra into the mix with 0 GCD means that potentially you could go into Hide, pop Tetra that has, again, 0 GCD and just start insta-casting Triple Meteor off CD. Not to mention that practically insta-cast level 1 Stormgust is great at zoning people or even casting it on top of your party to help protect them from getting engaged on as easily, right? This means that in GVG, you are an absolute monster at setting up fights and making plays for your guild. And since the majority of the PvP in this game that gives the most rewards is GVG content, I would have to put this class in A tier. Even for small scale DD, the zone control High Wiz provides is still top notch. The mistake I see a lot of people do is they're too dynamic for a class that needs to make sure that they play around their zone of control. We also didn't really get to experience late game where most of the damage spikes tend to happen. So at the very least, potentially, the possibility is pretty real for High Wizards. But again, compared to the rest, its overall DPS is still pretty underwhelming, which means that it's not going to be doing any carrying when doing your TRs. You're not going to be out-fragging most Dorams in GVGs. You are, however, going to be a key component to your guild winning. A bit of an unsung hero. But if I were to ask myself, do I absolutely need High Wizards in the guild to win? Yes. Yes, I definitely do. If you're going for straight damage, don't go for this class. If you're coming into this game solo, then don't choose this class because you'll need some help in getting your dailies done on time, especially your TR. But with TRs going into top 10 instead of top 6, that might not be as much of an issue anymore. And now as for Scholar. So Scholar, I would have to put in B tier for now, just because Scholars are kind of like in this like weird spot. Scholar utility is always and still is very much top notch. Dispel, LP, all of that. But again, it's in a bit of a weird spot at the moment. Our initial testing, for example, versus an Earth Element mob using Firebolt with double triple, plus passive, right? And again, elemental advantage, and somehow Psychic Wave did more single target damage. It's kind of insane. I'm not sure because I feel like, again, Firebolts, I do feel like they're just underwhelming at the moment. But the fact that Psychic Wave is doing this much damage to single targets is kind of insane for an AoE skill. So, at the very least, you have that option for GVGs to use Psychic Wave, right? I can definitely see the bolts getting buffed more than they already have recently. I think the class has a lot of potential. Again, in the hands of somebody really, really good, it can easily jump up to A tier. And if you are a mechanical god, you could easily get up to S tier as well, depending on the matchup, right? But for the most part, I do see the class has a lot of potential, especially with people trying to build against like crit / like physical classes more. It does open a window wherein if it gets buffed more, it's probably going to do a lot of crazy damage versus everyone who have been building against the current meta. A lot of the reasons why people are able to frag is because majority of classes that are big at the moment, the Synaxes, the Sacripali, but until then, the class is kind of like relegated to backup damage and utility. You absolutely can still frag out just because throwing an AoE into a clump of people, eventually, inevitably, you're going to get kills, much like wizards can. But I wouldn't go for this class if you want big damage. It's always going to have the utility. It's always going to have that potential, but it doesn't have the same agency that High Wizard does at the moment with Tetra. But again, big on utility, and Psychic Wave at the moment is carrying a lot of the damage that the class is supposed to be able to do with bolts. So, there's that for now. And the next one we have is Mastersmith. Mastersmith, I'm going to have to put it down on C tier, right behind like Champ. Champ, in my opinion, is still kind of like way better. And one thing to mention, I know people probably expected me to put it into D tier, but the fact of the matter is, I feel like in terms of balance right now, in terms of like how viable a class is, I feel like every class is viable. Anybody with hands can actually perform with a class to a certain degree. It's just that some of these classes are easier to perform with and have more usefulness to them. The problem with a class right now is that you tend to want to go in, is that usually with Mastersmith, you kind of want to go in for these like stun locks, break their gear. The issue is at the moment is that every class, almost every class rather, has a dash skill, and they have CC breaks, which kind of ruins your gameplay, because the key factor used to be is that you're going in, you're hoping to hit that first stun, and then you hope that it chains until they like die. So you can't really do that anymore. They'll just CC break, be CC immune for a second or two, and just kite away. Axe throwing, you kind of might as well go sniper unless you really like the novelty of the build. Turret build seems to be the best go-to option possibly, which is to say that Mastersmith still deals pretty decent damage. That's going to require a lot more testing. With that in mind, these things that Mastersmith can potentially do, besides being the possibility of breaking gear, Paladin and Lore Knight can also do it, but they can do it while being tankier. This doesn't necessarily make the class bad, it's just that the others are just better at this point in time. And then the next one we have is Biochemist. I mean, this one's pretty easy. You guys probably already know this. S tier. Absolutely. Biochemist is absolutely S tier. The class does well in almost everything. It's the king of PvE damage. It has decent utility. The only content it can possibly perform average is probably DD if teams know how to abuse the class. But if a team is built around it to cover its weakness, then it's still going to become a pain to deal with. It's just not the best in that specific content. The next one we have is obviously going to be Bard Dancer. right? Bard Dancer, I'm definitely gonna have to put into S tier. I know that they're trying to balance out the healing, especially in like PvP, to make it heal less, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still going to be the best sustain in the game. It's still gonna have really good buffs, and Bard specifically for casters, Dancer specifically for snipers, for example. Great buffs, best sustain in the game. Can still build tanky, built correctly, can be damn near impossible to kill unless you burst them down by ganging up on them or having a champ Asura them, right? And then the next class we have is Sniper. Sniper, I can easily put Sniper in A tier. Sniper still, as we've seen, still scales really well. Can shred while still being able to build counter crit classes, and they can do that while still holding, like, let's say like a Requiem card. They can easily proc that and use that to help them kite even more. The class in the current stage of the game is just really good. Especially with like anti-fear, anti-CC cards being so nerfed compared to how they used to be. It just kind of enables the class to be able to do more, and really have really good spacing in PvP. In the right hands and with the proper team comp and build, yeah, they can be absolutely very hard to kill. They can absolutely carry for their team. I mean, not much else to say. This class is very much needed. It has damage, has enough mobility to be a massive headache. Windwalk is always a thing. A tier for Sniper. And then the last one, I would have to put Doram in S tier. So this class is kind of like the embodiment of Fire and Forget. Like specifically, we're talking about physical Doram. It was already pretty strong when CBT started, but somehow it got buffed like twice in a row. Granted, some of those buffs were PvE buffs, right? But so what they essentially can do, they can just unleash their summons, walk away while those summons do work. And even if they die, their summons still run around. The only clear weakness is if people run away from them in GVG, those summons, they can't do most of their damage, right? But in GVG, however, people don't really have that awareness. Usually it's stack versus stack fighting, so you're gonna be able to output like your entire damage. Another thing too is what I've noticed with the classes like Kit when I was playing it is that it gets a lot of free stats for no reason, right? That stats that scale really well into the late game. It also has stealth built in, has a mobility skill with Lope, and more importantly, it also has a cheat death skill to bait in any unsuspecting players. So it gives you a really long window to be able to survive and for your support and your team to kind of like stay with you. So yeah, I mean, this class probably has one of the most like well-rounded kits in the game. If you want to be able to enjoy the game in like all aspects, right? I think Doram is definitely the go-to for this version of the game. Even in like DD, where people tend to have more awareness, so long as you have more zone control and people have to go to you in order to make any type of play, they're gonna receive that damage regardless anyway. Only issue would probably be the Goblin King mode, where summons would opt to go for the Goblin while your enemies, kill you. But yeah, Doram, absolutely, in my opinion, I think if I didn't already have a teammate in our tier cup team that's going Doram, I probably would have gone Doram instead. And we need to have like a flexible roster, so I can't really go double Doram, right? That would have been my choice of class to go for.